So when we refer to research paradigms, typically you will notice this term being mentioned, for example, in articles referring to when there are articles discussing different methods in measuring X or trying to explain Y using different means. Okay? So why do we cater to so many options in methods as part of our toolbox? Why not just go with one and be okay with it? Okay? Why do we have to have so many means on trying to get to what we want to explain? Okay? So it will all go back to what assumptions that you subscribe to about the world. So the different knowledge claims that you are adopting or you are trying to test as well will be based on some fundamental assumptions about knowledge or about reality in general. Okay? So before we so in order for you to appreciate why you have some inclination to apply or to favor some methods than the others, is not simplistically because you are aversive on one or on another. But let us appreciate. So at the end of this discussion, my goal is that you will develop greater appreciation, that it is rooted on philosophical roots as to why you have some inclination to think in a certain manner when you're approaching research. Okay? And also at the end of this course, you will be able, no, at the end of this lecture rather, you'll be able to familiarize yourselves with some terms that are related to research paradigms. Okay. So these philosophical assumptions are anchored uh, consecutively, or it has some contingency element in it, meaning um, one is dependent on the other when it comes to deducing, not, no, I don't want to use the term deducing. When it comes to uh, aligning your action with your assumptions, okay? Because of course we're reasonable, right? So we are applying the scientific researcher here. So we are reasonable. So on some assumptions about the world, knowledge is like, and therefore how you're going to acquire that in in your pursuit of knowledge. So let us first refer to ontology. So that's what we're referring to as how the nature of knowledge works. So now, if you are in a discipline that is concerned with uh, certain subject matter, there are some, it's the will be different from one discipline to another. So for example, the nature of knowledge, for example, if you're a physicist, not a physician, if you're a physicist, okay, the way you approach the world, the way you approach your research, the way you approach your systematic observation is anchored on the nature of knowledge about matter. Okay. On the other hand, if you are, let's say, um, if you're a political analyst, for example, how you view, for instance, justice, how you view equality, how you view rights, because those are your subject matter of concern. The nature of knowledge on your friend, because their knowledge, depending on their ontology, becomes anchored on that. Your discipline, the discipline where you are at, is anchored based on the subject matter that you're trying to study. Okay? So if you're a physicist, more likely your ontology is on the side of realism, naive realism, or you assume that there's only one objective reality out there. There is truth out there that you will have to capture. And then on the side of the other side, the subjectivity, you are inclining with the notion that the subjective reality, since an individual is constructing the reality, or what, in other words, you're assigning meaning to your experiences based on your context, then your subjective reality is equally valid as with other people experiencing other things. Okay? So your perspective about the world is as important or as valid as what other people might be experiencing, even if they're different. Okay? So those are the two different side of the pole when we are referring to ontology. Okay? So one objective reality and the other is the subject, not assuming that there's only one single objective reality. Okay, so if your nature of knowledge is established, again, based on the nature of what you're trying to study, okay, now your approach on how you're going to investigate, how you're going to acquire the knowledge will become different. You will even question, is it really even possible to capture that? Okay. So for example, in psychology, in the social sciences, since we're dealing with constructs, we cannot grapple it. It's not tangible. So now our way of obtaining that knowledge will have a different approach to how physicists would use their toolbox in terms of their research methods. Okay? Obtain knowledge becomes different because ontology, okay? Whether you acknowledge subjective reality values, we are thinking of what what an example would be, what is the stance of the researcher in conducting the pursuit of knowledge? Are we assuming that it should be neutral, okay? That you should not include your own perspective as it might stain the interpretation of the study? Or are you saying that you also value the human experience and the way the researcher will interpret the subject matter as equally valuable? Okay. So another example of values would be, are we following, let's say in terms of the scientific method, the value of uh, transparency so that we can verify the data as the basis of the claim. So that in general is a value. But in terms of opposing claims, um, the value here would be referring to whether we're going to be detached or not. Okay. Then for the rhetoric, it's about how do you deliver, how do you communicate the knowledge that you obtain to people. Okay. So there is going to be some convention on how you're going to report it, because there are some assumptions behind why you are saying that. Why are you delivering that, communicating that knowledge in that manner, right? And then lastly, the methodology. Methodology. This is the detailed step-by-step procedure that the researcher applies in their study so that other researchers can also apply it as well. Okay? So we are reporting that in order for other researchers to also test what we're doing. Okay. So now, as an introduction to the term paradigm, so I hope that you will not develop an aversive feeling whenever you encounter this highfalutin term. Okay. So a paradigm is your set of connected assumptions about how the world works. So in this case, since we're in the social sciences, where our paradigm is rooted in, let's say, the social world, right, which provides philosophical and conceptual framework for the organized study of that work. So when you're referring to philosophical and conceptual framework, you are setting the parameters on how you view the world that you are picking into. Right? So essentially, it's the basic orientation of the researcher to the theory and uh, the research approach in general. Okay? It constitutes abstract beliefs and principles that shape how the researcher sees, interpret, and acts within that world. Okay? And because of this orientation, so you now have a certain perspective, certain worldview on the nature of knowledge, what is the truth, what is the nature of the truth, right? So, and what you believe, how you can approach the truth, right? Is it even possible to get to the truth, right? So those kinds of questions, depending on what your assumptions are, it will align your mode on how you're going to investigate that problem will be especially rooted and aligned to those assumptions. That's why we are referring to research paradigm as your uh, set of assumptions and therefore influencing your design on how you approach the study. So in this sequence or manner, we are applying our philosophical roots to our design of our study. So again, we question what is the reality, right? Again, or the nature of knowledge on your subject matter. How are you going to investigate that? How can you acquire knowledge? So are you going to, is it possible to acquire data by direct contact or indirect contact? Is the observation that you get something that is interpretable in a way that can be is the data that you're trying to acquire reflecting what is in the real world, especially what in terms of the conclusions that you will derive from it. In terms of the theoretical perspective, we're just using an organized logical narrative on how variables are connected with each other or how events make sense. And in this theory, we are making use of that as a tool to generate predictions, okay? Or different um to generate different ideas on how we think the world is designed or is gonna unfold. So it's useful because if we really are able to distill the general patterns about the world, then that will be, in a practical sense, very useful when we're trying to manage our problems. So the way we view things will become clearer and the interventions that we're going to employ according to our goal will be easy to manage. If it were to, right? So if it follows, if the explanation follows what the okay. So now for the half part of this methodology, methods, and sources, we're just specific to down to the study in terms of what the researcher is doing. So in the next 3 slides, I'm going to show you the common terms that you will encounter when you are describing an approach in research. Okay. So what first pair we have hagiographic versus nomothetic. Hagiographic is concerned with individual in-depth investigation. We are we appreciate that the individual story can provide a lot of insights because probably this individual might be so special and might be different. That's why acquiring more details about them will become so insightful. Okay? For example, if the society is so amazing, a case study on his biography will be very much uh, is going to be very interesting and very insightful. So the way people put interest to Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, okay? So the unicorns of our generation. So in that way, if we obtain more details about them, then it becomes so insightful to the humankind. No? So we say that details about them are so important to understand. So in contrast, so since these people are kind of outliers, so now I'm using statistical terms. So since these people are so special, how about the general population? So now we're more concerned with general patterns. And so we are subscribing to the conventions of the use of statistics in the nomothetic approach, because the goal here is on the general patterns of behavior that is considered ubiquitous. When you say ubiquitous, they are universal, that even if you go from one country to another, you should not be bothered or worried that the behavior, so you should be able to observe the same things, expect the same things from one population to another, because of the nomothetic approach, assuming or aspiring, framing our knowledge in a way, approach to acquiring knowledge in a way that is um, general, right? So that's why the goal here is to predict, to explain, okay, rather than individual understanding. Because in that way, if we can infer things about the person, uh, just because of our general pattern that we have already established, then it's still very meaningful in understanding one individual. Okay? Unlike with idiographic, since it's not generalizable, what you get from that case is only applicable to inclusion, can go as far as different generations or different population groups, because you are saying that you've found the universal pattern of behavior, that it's not sensitive to any changes in population. The reason we're using abstract uh, explanations in nomothetic approach is because you distilled the target subject matter from the context. Okay, so you're no longer concerned about the context. In nomothetic approach, we see that as a noise. Okay, so it will just lead you to conclude so many things that are not really conclusive. So that's why we collect a lot of data in order. The reasoning behind there is that in case there are error in the pattern, something else will still emerge eventually, because it's so many. The the data is so big, the volume is so big, that whatever pattern emerge can be considered what's actually going on to most of people. In that way, it's generalizable, because whatever patterns that will arise, it's interpreted as generalizable. Okay? Whatever patterns that will arise, it is assumed that the errors are already uh, dwindled down. Okay? So, so now for the emic and the ethic, you will encounter these terms most especially in cross-cultural studies, because they keep on arguing that you cannot fully generalize your the claim that you got in investigating, let's say, the American population, and apply the same thing, for example, among the Filipino or Asian population. So that's usually the contention or the reasoning behind why they would propose a study that is emic, or with the assumption that the group of individuals of individuals are so special, or it has some therefore the way you gather details, okay, but you're not you get from them to us, they are relation because they're unique. Okay? So it will all boil down, all the things that we talk about, the ontology, the epistemology, axiology, and this combination of the tandem between, is it emic, ethic, no? All these things will all boil down whether you are following or subscribing to the notion of qualitative perspective or quantitative perspective. So in qualitative methods, since we value most especially the context where the person is moving around, and so how they construe reality is subjected into that, then you are concerned in getting as much details as possible about how their context shape the way they think, right? Based on their lived experiences. And then in the quantitative methods, on the other hand, since you're assuming that there are universal observations about the world, then in that case, the way you try to aggregate these experiences in terms of making things simple, you are assigning a score. Okay? You're assigning a score, and it's interpretable. Let's say in a Likert scale, you have the 5, you have the 1, to represent whether they agree or disagree, or they follow the characteristic. The characteristic applies to them perfectly or not really, not that perfectly. They disagree with it. So in those cases, since numbers are considered symbols that are meaningful, we now make use of statistics as a very useful way to simplify our understanding of the data from massive volume of individuals. Because you are able to aggregate that and have a meaningful interpretation to that. That's why you're able to generalize. So you're now using null hypothesis significance testing. Okay. Okay, so for positivism, so I'm going to present to you four general research paradigms. So the first two are positivism and post-positivism. So it posits, hang on for a moment. Okay, so in positivism and post-positivism, this approach uses hypothetical deductive method. It means that when you're deducing, it means that you have a general statement that you assume to be true, or maybe that's the one that you're testing. And when you are reducing it to testable hypothesis, you are again subjecting yourself to be falsified. So this is the major distinction between positivism and post-positivism. If you can recall in your XP-Psych, I don't remember if it were in the lab. I think it's in the laboratory discussion, where the falsification criterion as part of what makes a good theory. So okay, so the falsification aspect criterion. So you're saying that the claim will be subject to testing repeatedly over time until we can find we can find evidence to disprove it or not support it. So I don't want to use the word disprove or prove. Okay? So we're just here to say that does it support or does it not support? So whenever we fail to falsify the claim, then we tend to develop our confidence that the theory is working or that the theory matches what we observe in reality. Okay? So that's post-positivism. The main difference as well would be it claims that whatever the truth is, we recognize that humans are fallible creatures. We also have our own biases. Researchers have their own biases, and therefore it might be complete absolute researchers to copy absolute in absolute sense, because we ourselves are humans and prone to biases. And our instruments in trying to capture the reality might also be flawed. That's why we're so obsessed with reliability and validity of the instruments, again, because we're trying to capture what biases are there when we're trying to look at the subject matter that we're trying to observe, trying to study. Okay. So, but both of them are so similar. The goal is prediction and control. The goal is we want to look at general universal observations uh, among people. Okay. So that's why I combine them, because they're so similar. Okay. The only thing that makes post-positivism different is that it has some level of caution that the researcher themselves are fallible. Okay. So in positivism and post-positivism, it's nomothetic ethic, and the approach is the researcher is detached. So again, because we're assuming that we are fallible, we need to detach ourselves from the subject matter, okay, in order to be objective in what we're doing. In constructivism and interpretivism, so again, we follow or we subscribe to, we validate people's experiences, that it is equally important or it is equally true. Okay, I don't want to use the word true. Okay. So it is their reality, their subjective experiences are equally valid. Okay. So they're equally valid in a sense that they should not be dismissed. Okay, so that's the word. Right, that's the word. Because individuals, since we are experiencing our life, right? And the way we experience our life, we construe our reality according to our context, according to how we deal with the world. And therefore, your position in life might be might influence the way you
Wow.
construe the world. So yes, Francis. Okay, so if let's say if you're a powerful person or or not, then possibly the way you construe the world might be different. So your perspective might be different. It's a relativist. So this is correct. Relativist position. It's relative. Okay. That depending on your position in the society, how you relate to people can influence the way you think about the world. Okay. That's why the way it approaches inquiry is naturalistic. It means that you are you value the context. You want to understand the natural setting where your respondents are engaging in order to have a fuller picture of their experience, of the way they construe their reality. So here we have hagiographic emic. So again, we are looking at in-depth experience, and we do not generalize what we get from our data. And the researcher is considered to be an important instrument. The researcher's interaction with the respondent is considered to be a crucial component in acquiring insights in the study. Okay. So unlike with positivism and post-positivism, the researcher has to be detached in order to avoid any biases in the interpretation. But in this end, there are some means on how researchers are trying to address that. But it's still equally important that the researchers are able to empathize and able to understand what different human experiences are like. Okay? So we are recognizing that. That's why immersion typically, or multiple interaction in different situation with the respondents are most of the time applied in this research paradigm. So lastly, so this is the fourth one, critical ideological. This one, I think, is another step forward uh, relative to the others because it's proactive, it's idealistic. It's trying to shape the society in a way that what they think it should be. So there are ideals, there are things that people find to be that has to be demystified in the current state of the world. So what do you mean, Miss? Ang ano mo naman? Shadow ka namang abstract. Ano ba yung sinasabi mo? Okay, so ang ibig sabihin nun, so this is a concrete example, okay? So halimbawa, the way, so within power relations na tinutukoy, so our society is shaped by powerful people. So for example, the way our politics is designed is, for example, most people, because they are, okay, in the interest among the wealthy elite people because they're rubbing elbows with the leaders whom they can influence to promote policies that are beneficial to their interests but may not be as beneficial to the masses. So in that way, policies favoring the elites might improve the welfare of the elites but not the masses. Okay, so in that case, since the elites who have more power in the society can shape the can shape what's going on around you. Therefore, the way you construe your reality is only subjected to that um, parameters or constraints that they were able to employ in shaping the society. And since you do not have power in influencing what the society might be like, your reality is now bounded by their actions. Okay? So so as an example would be how women are viewed in the past, but I think not in the Philippines naman, na since they are considered inferior to men, they were not given the right to vote. They were like it's an absurd idea to see women studying, right? So because the perspective in among the public is that women don't deserve to do this, women do not have the right to do things, no? So since they are at that time the minority, the researchers are uh, putting a step foot forward in a proactive stance to try to break some glass ceiling that people are trapped in, and therefore to enlighten some groups of people that are in the minority, okay? So to empower others, because most of the time they might not be included in terms of their voice might not be included when it comes to when we talk about welfare. Okay, so that's why it's called critical ideological, because somehow it advocates for ideals, it advocates for change, and it problematizes situation that people might think or might accept just as a normal thing, or might not even recognize at all that there is a problem, which is a problem. So that's how critical ideological might be a little bit controversial, if I might say, or a little bit different. It's more action oriented. Okay, so you're challenging the current perception of reality among people. So you're challenging that. So that's what the researchers are trying to do. So they're aspiring for something to change, given some values, given some ideals. Okay? So yan, so somehow mayroon siyang ethics components as to why we are aspiring for some ideals. And to think that if you're looking at scientific perspective, you're just concerned about what's the truth, right? So in this case, since you're accounting for subjective experiences as valid, you're also including that, then Therefore, you are acknowledging different experiences and trying to provide further insight on what could be the possible things that might turn out given X and Y. So that's why this is kind of difficult to tackle. Okay. I think in sociology, in behavioral sciences, they are more inclined to that paradigm, the critical ideological. Philosophy, philosophy department, Behasai department, I think they're political sciences, international studies, I think they're more inclined to this research paradigm because they are advocating for some ideals. Okay. So moving forward, you can, with all these four things, somehow they're like a gradient. No, yung post-positivism and positivism on this side, and interpretivism and critical uh, ideological part would be on the interpretivism because they're accounting for the subjective realities of people. So in this sense, you are now already looking at the division between the qualitative and quantitative research methods. So depending on where you are inclined to believe in philosophically, so you're more inclined to thinking in ways that are quantitative in nature in terms of approaching your pursuit in knowledge, or qualitative in nature. Okay, so in quantitative and qualitative approaches, here are some nuggets of its features. Okay, so in the quantitative approach, we are attempting to measure objective observations. And since we are concerned with how do we quantify constructs, we are dealing with variables. Okay? Variables assign meaning and interpretation to quantified values on the things that you're observing. And the reason we're so concerned with reliability, we want, since again, the researchers are fallible, we are so concerned about the instruments as well as fallible. And therefore, our conclusions might be derailed because of those errors in measurement. That's why we're concerned with reliability. We want to ensure that the consistency in what we're measuring will be the same across time, across several tests of measurement. It should result in the same set of values, right? And therefore, the conclusion will be safe to interpret. So, value-free. So, ang ibig sabihin dito ng value-free, hindi yung amoral. So, ang ibig sabihin dito is, katulad nga ng sinabi natin kanina, the researcher is detached. So, you are not trying to advocate for some ideals. You're just there to observe what is there. So, you're just there to describe, or you're just there to explain what it is and not to direct what's gonna happen or what the ideal should be. So you should not be concerning yourselves into that in that manner. So separate theory and data. So what's it's referring to is that the way theories organize events in a meaningful way will determine what kind of data will be relevant to capture. Right? So that's what it means. Independent of context, again, we want to distill context from the universal observation. So that's why we're making it abstract, to devoid it from the context. We assume that regardless of context, these universal regularities will still apply. Right? And in terms of observations, we need to get a lot of data so that we can dilute any sources of error if there is any. Okay? So we can dilute the noises. And the emerging or the common pattern that is in there will be made obvious in statistics. So yeah, use of statistics. So researcher detached. In qualitative approach, again, since individuals construct their own reality, therefore the meaning that you construe in your life experiences can be collectively shared, and therefore the consciousness will be shared and mutual. So the way we communicate, the way we apply meaning on things will become embedded to people's consciousness, because their lived experiences are so similar, and the way they interact with their environment becomes uh, the crucial factor that shape their consciousness. So that's how constructing social reality is like. And then focusing on interactive processes and events, we are concerned with the dynamics, especially how the person is acting in their environment, not only the physical environment, but also the social environment. So what are the set of expectations? How do they deal with that? Okay. Authenticity is the key factor. So what it meant here is the involvement of the researcher, since we are concerned with not fully conforming to, not we're not fully uh we're not pressured to conform to what is assumed to be there. Okay, so if the data does not do not if the data do not fit, then we're not pushing it. So we're saying that it's a separate entity, or rather a separate event that is not captured by the theory being thrown at it. Okay, so we do not push it. And then values present and explicit. So when you're advocating for, let's say, a certain perspective, then the researchers are uh, making sure that it is evident in the data. So it's not really trying to taint the results, but really it's more about the action-orientedness embedded in the research study altogether. And then the theory and the data are fused. So what it means is that you are making sense of the data based on the theory, and you are not trying to um you're not trying to falsify the theory. You're just using the theory to guide how you interpret your data. Okay. So you're not there to validate that. Situationally constrained, um, few cases and subjects. So since we are saying that it's not generalizable, you recognize that the context that they're in is special and not shared by many. So thematic analysis is a common way of analyzing text data. And then, of course, the involvement of the research. So those are the different characteristics and features of conducting quantitative and qualitative approach in research, particular to social sciences. Okay. So I'm going to end our discussion here. So this is just, I like comics. So this is just a clip that resonate with me. It's like showing us that you might think that how you perceive the world is unique, but by the time that you're already engaging in that idealism or in that perspective, you will encounter more and more people who have the same way of viewing the world, and you will realize that you're not alone in that perspective. So yeah, but it's a funny way of delivering it in this art. So that's how I end. We can conclude this uh, lecture.